right, we'll see. Is this our what third or fourth attempt? So we'll just make sure it's actually running before we get into it. But this is part of an inside joke that I don't know if Seth even knows about his podcast. That I will not listen to his podcast on a day I'm traveling. Not even while I'm traveling, but a day I'm traveling because for guys that love to fly, the three of the the regular hosts are constantly delayed, misconnected, everything. So I think we've actually got the video.
Wait, you think it's contagious if you're even listening? We're gonna like affect you?
It's happened, and I realize that there's no. I think when you mention the magic words quadrillion, which happens at least every third episode.
Only when we want to make Steven mad.
Okay, I think we've got video. If those of you that are watching, if you're still having issues, I think we've got video and audio, and so this is irregular operations, and I guess we'll make that the theme of this episode. So for those who haven't heard the introduction the first two or three times, we'll do it differently each way. The aviation expert that answers any question I can dream up is Seth Miller, and he's with us tonight. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and sorry for the delays.
All right. Well, we've got the audience coming back, so they've stuck out with it. They are travelers. Okay, we're hearing no issues now, so that's good. Thank you all for bearing with us. We've got some friends who even tuning in all the. We've got Traeger all the way in London joining. So you have appeal across the time zones and reasonable awake hours.
Gotta wonder if he's drinking out of the Caesar's glassware or something else special tonight. I assume it's a nice glass of I don't know, the XO. What are we drinking tonight? I'm having my Cubana rum, Havana Club, and a Cubana champagne flute. Because believe it or not, on Cubana, even in business class, the mixed drinks were served in plastic, so I had to order a glass of the really, really bad sparkling wine to get a champagne glass that I could steal.
From stuffing yourself into overhead compartments to pocketing Cuban glassware, you've done it all with the airlines.
And some good things along the way. I mean, I'm not a terrible person.
Well, I'm trying to think. Was it a U.S. Was it like the last U.S. Airways flight ever, or something like out of Phoenix that you made sure you were the last person that boarded the plane and scanned in?
The last continental coded departure. It wasn't the last one to land, but it was Phoenix to Cleveland, mid-con red eye on I want to say it was a Saturday night, Friday night or Saturday night, and it was, I mean, it's a terrible flight. No one should take that, but I ended up making friends with the gate agents because I was just doing a straight out and back turn. I didn't need any suitcases or anything, and so my bag was actually candy for all the crew I ran into along the way. Almost like a trick-or-treat Halloween thing. I gave them all little bags of candy. It was like, this weekend's going to suck and you guys are all working. Things are almost certainly going to break. Here's a snack for when, you're stuck. I had the gate agent and the counter agent gave me a huge hug, thanked me. It was like, you're the only person that's ever said anything nice to us working here kind of thing. Which you can imagine, like, airline agents get yelled at all the time. No one ever says anything nice. So I get it. But it was really interesting. A couple months later, I actually had a connection through there, and I was standing at the front counter, and I sort of looked at her, and she looked at me, and there was like, are you the person that we had that moment like 3 months ago? And it was, and we caught up again, and this and that. It was actually really sweet. So being a nice person is a good idea, is what I'm getting at there.
So you'll say that you're an introvert, but you've also taken over gate agent roles at times. You've run an information booth at Boston Logan Airport during flight delays when there was no official employee to run it. So
and the Massport police were not amused.
So you come into your element at airports, and that'll be a big theme of what we'll talk about today. Right into the news and the changes. Richard Kerr has popped up, and he's asking what's the next airline to retire the A380s after Air France. So first, for those that don't follow news as closely, the Air France, any other airlines that have retired A380s or not, and what does that mean?
So Air France is done with the A380s. It turns out that it's a great airplane if you have very limited resources in terms of slots and need to move 500 people or 600 people at a time between airports. It turns out to not be very good if you can only fit 400, if you can only load 400 people on it or 300 people on it, because the economics fall apart real fast. 4 engines, A lot of maintenance, a lot of challenges. It's just not as fuel efficient. And so, the quad jets are in general disappearing. The 380 in particular, Emirates bought a ton. They actually are today also are trying to get out of their last 5 deliveries. So that's bad news for Airbus. And they're parking 40 some of theirs, but they've got 115. So that's not going to be fully gone. If I had to bet, it's sort of a toss-up between Malaysia Airlines, which more or less wasn't running theirs anyways. They were using it for charter services, and Umrah, and what's the other one? The pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, Hajj, pilgrimage, although these days those are mostly not happening anyways, so who knows when and how that'll come back. I would say Malaysia Airlines is a good candidate for not operating them anymore. Lufthansa is a very good candidate for not operating them anymore. They've got 15, so it's a pretty small fleet. They had previously sort of hinted that they weren't going to bring many of them back and moved 7 of them to long-term storage at an airport out in the desert in Spain. Buttoned them up in expectation that they wouldn't fly again, or at least not for a year or two. The latest news on that is if they come back, only 7 would come back and only based out of Munich. But today, the first 777X destined for Lufthansa also moved over to the flight line fuel dock, as though Boeing is going to try to put some gas in it and see if maybe the engines spin. So as those new planes come on board, and it sort of depends on how quickly demand recovers, but if the 777Xs are getting delivered, which, certification and whatnot still all has to happen, but as that all comes together, if those are available and solve the demand problem that the 380s were theoretically fixing, between that and 350s and other planes, I could see Lufthansa not bringing them back at all.
Wow. And for those that don't follow the industry, as I understand, it's easier to get rid of an entire airplane from an airline's fleet than taking a few of this and a few of that, because people are trained and certified on one gate. I mean, all different things around it, and so that's why we're seeing this kind of news.
Yeah, it's maintenance is a problem. Pilots certification is an issue, especially flight attendants can usually be certified across multiple types. Spare parts are very expensive, and you have to keep enough different places of things that break, up to and including engines, around. And spare parts can be very, very costly when you're building a new fleet, to the point that as the airlines are going back and seeking additional loans right now, a lot of what they're putting up as collateral is their spare part collections for the in addition to the airplanes. So you're talking tens of millions of dollars for, a particular type at a large fleet.
While we're talking about spare parts, a recurring theme of your podcast has been Rolls-Royce engines.
Yes.
What's the comic relief that we can have during the virus stuff? This has been going on for what, 2-3 years?
At least. When the 787 grounding started, it was Rolls-Royce engines that were not exploding, but had the propensity to think about doing that. And so they had to replace a bunch of the components on the inside. Still an issue. They're still working through the backlog of replacing the parts. It's an interesting one because they were still delivering the new ones and making the new ones were getting delivered with the correct version of the components, but they just couldn't manufacture the components fast enough to deliver replacement pieces to all these airlines fast enough. So it's that was tough. It's also, among all the challenges and bad news coming out of sort of the pandemic groundings that we're dealing with, Rolls-Royce did announce today also that their Derby office, where all these engines are made in the United Kingdom, is looking at 30% of the staff being furloughed or laid off. So very bad news today or yesterday on that front as well. It's there's not a lot of happy going on in the industry right now, which is too bad. But I'm trying. I'm drinking. That's happy.
Maybe sitting outside that environment. I live in Seattle now, and so my father and I went to the Boeing factory tour, which is an incredible experience. It's not like the typical you see the beer being brewed, you get a beer, and it's not that different than your mic. I mean, it is on this incredible scale. And what struck me as just a casual observer is the way the flow is when you're up up on the top looking down. The first assembly line I saw was the 747, and it was all grizzled men and women, gray haired mostly, on their backs with wrenches and bolts and all of this. And then by the time at the end, the 787, it was like Legos, I guess. And it was all people in cubicles sitting behind giant multi-monitor setups, and it was a totally different progression. And it struck me that it seemed like a lot was being lost in that transition from lying on your back with a wrench to the digital designs.
Well, good news, bad news. There still is a lot of mechanical work that goes into the final assembly, even on the new planes. So there are mechanics out there doing those jobs, pulling the things together. A lot of the real automation that we've seen so far recently has been in component work. Airbus is building its new wings, for example, and the 777X is tried to do a similar thing. They're doing automation of some of the riveting rather than manual work on that. Boeing, actually, for the 777X, tried to automate a lot of those things and decided the automation wasn't good enough and went back to manual for some of the work, which was really interesting. But if you're into the aircraft final assembly line tour, I agree the Boeing tour is awesome. Go to Hamburg. Go to Finkenwerder, which is on the south side of the river Elbe in Hamburg, and you got to, it's a bit of a schlep to get out to where the tour starts from. You need a car pretty much. It's really hard to get there without your own wheels, and it's not right in town. But unlike the Boeing tour where you're up in the catacombs or the catwalks, catacombs are below. Unlike where you're up in the catwalks, the Finkenwerder tour, you're on the floor. And when I say, like, if you want to break the rules, you can reach out and grab a winglet for an A320 and walk away with it. You won't get far because they're giant and very heavy, but you can accidentally trip and kick a tire waiting to be installed. So they don't keep you that far away from the planes on the German option. They also trust, as Europeans tend to do, that you're not going to be a jackass and that you will actually keep your hands in your pockets and stay inside the lines and not be stupid. But something that you can't get away with in America anymore, unfortunately. But the Finkenwerder tour is well worth it. Bring your passport with you. It is required for entry. I didn't once, and that was an interesting experience.
Your comment about the car made me think of listening to your podcast and meeting other av geeks.
Yeah.
I feel like you're the only one who's not allergic to going more than 2 miles from the airport, and you don't rent cars all that much, but you actually use other means of transport. You actually see destinations. So why are you the outlier? What is it about av geeks that?
I will say all three of us do actually leave the airport. So, I mean, as a podcast, we may be different. But Stephen and Foz travel too and actually go visit places. I think the answer for me is I don't just love airplanes. I do love airplanes, and that's the av geek part, but I love everything else too. I really, really enjoy anything related to travel and transportation and movement and getting out and exploring. And whether it's hiking or renting a car and driving through the longest tunnel in Austria, which is really, really long and has awesome, like, sort of breakdown lanes on the side of the road that are monitored, I learned, because I decided I wanted a picture. And so in the breakdown lanes, there's like arrows pointing each direction. It's like 8 kilometers this way, 8 kilometers that way, and this and that. And so, and there's speed limit signs up on the, like, overhead, whatever, in the tunnel. And I pulled off into one of these pull-out areas, the breakdown areas, and looked both ways and ran across the street into the breakdown area on the other side, took a picture of my car with the arrows and whatnot, ran back across the street and got in the car. And by the time I got back in the car, the speed limits had all dropped. And it's because they thought there was an accident because a car had pulled off in the breakdown lane and they needed to slow everybody down. So I may have accidentally caused a traffic jam in a tunnel in Austria because that was something that I thought was cool one day when I was driving through the countryside. I don't know if that's good news or bad news about me, but that's pretty much sums up me completely. Like, I'll do stupid shit like that and, oops, I caused a problem. Oh, well. Wasn't that bad.
The comments are already beyond my ability to handle. So I'll say that, I don't know, it was maybe 6-7 years ago at some event. I asked for permission to look at Seth's screen as he used Flyer Talk because I don't know how many posts do you have. It's in the tens of thousands, right? And I imagine
67,000-ish.
and I guess is your usage gone down in recent years with?
It has come down in recent years for a variety of reasons. Mostly the toxic social environment there, but and just a change in overall how information shares and spreads. But I think I'm still one of the top 10 posters by post count, which
so how does
is either good or bad news.
You live on Twitter a lot. I would
do.
guess that's one of your as you said, as information changes and spreads. Is that what you say your go-to source for up to the minute, or there's other sources?
I spend a lot of time on Twitter. That's where I probably glean the most information. There's also a lot of crap there, so it's figuring out what to pay attention to and who to pay attention to and what's real can be a challenge. It's not like I want to say it's socially and like the interactions are better than Flyer Talk was, but I think you can carve out different relationships now through Twitter that are harder. Flyer Talk's not quite as real time, and that's a big part of where the transition has been for me in terms of why I find it more valuable. I still go back to Flyer Talk a couple times a week. It's just not a couple times a minute anymore.
And Richard had a follow up on the Rolls Royce. He's saying that must be great business for Delta here in Atlanta, and it would tie it into on a recent episode. You talked about Delta's shop even making these military use COVID-19 isolation chambers. Is that the same shop that's working on this?
Sort of. The engines aren't great news for Delta, although Delta does do engine checks. They actually, a big part of their A321neo order was signing on as the U.S. station, the main U.S. facility for doing repairs and inspections on the Pratt & Whitney engines that power those. That's going to be a multi-billion-dollar revenue source for the airline, as other carriers will use the Delta MRO facilities, which is Maintenance and Repair Organization. I know, Stefan, I get in trouble when I use abbreviations with you and acronyms and don't explain them. MRO is a maintenance operation, maintenance base. So that's going to actually be a big.
You guys have said what is it? O&D probably 10,000 times in your podcast, and you've never once defined it.
Origin and destination. People who just fly nonstop without a connection. You're right, though. We never. I want to say that, like, somewhere back in episode 50, you were giving me the same shit, 5 years ago, and we finally did say it once, and then we forget to do it every now and then. We gotta reseed those data bits. But the Delta Flight Products group is the folks that did a lot of the engineering behind the COVID transport and some of the other things. They actually make their own monuments. So like the big walls and stuff that go in the cabin, Delta can make some of those themselves now. It's a lot of like injection molded plastics and thermoplastics and materials that are super fire retardant and all sorts of things like that, and are certified to withstand you flying into it at 16 times the 16 times the force of gravity, a 16G test, without damaging you or it, or you mostly. But Delta Flight Products has also developed some of their own in-flight entertainment systems, like the A330-900. That IFE system is from Delta Flight Products, with some help from. Some of the original systems were designed and helped in partnership with GoGo, but the newest versions of them, Delta's doing all themselves. So, two separate operations. Actually, the interesting part now is because no one's developing or buying new in-flight entertainment systems, no one wants that capital expense, and no one's upgrading the interiors of their aircraft, really. The Delta Flight Products team needs something to do, and we're seeing in the news everybody's putting plexiglass everywhere, basically between agents and customers. A lot of companies have to buy that. For Delta, they just called Delta Flight Products and said, "Hey guys, go make this." And because they have all the plastic shaping and forming materials and tools and everything else, they took that project on in-house and were able to engineer and produce, and they're getting those all installed by the end of the month. So,
I saw that press release was a couple days ago. So that's coming in house. That's very cool.
Yeah, it was yesterday's, I think. So yeah, they're doing a lot of neat things. They did masks a month ago because they needed something to do to keep people busy, and they're just coming up with good ways to use their staff. So I give them a lot of respect for that.
I'm thinking. I don't want to make I don't want to make fun of people's good intentions in that way, but the comparison I thought of, and yes, I'm a Delta flyer. I'm a million miler. I'll be 2 million miler this year if I can fly once to Shanghai. I'm thinking of that compared to AA getting agents in their lounge in Miami
To with sewing machines.
with sewing machines stitching masks, which is a wonderful effort, but it's very cool that Delta has that
Yeah,
capability
it's
to do this kind of.
different type of mask. Also, the Delta
Yeah.
ones are like the big plastic shields that go over your face that you wear the other mask underneath. So everybody's doing what they can where they can.
Does any other airline have that kind of capability? That like this
Um,
kind of thing?
the probably the closest that gets talked about a lot is Lufthansa Technik,
Hmm.
which is almost exactly the same in terms of they handle. I mean, Lufthansa Technik is doing the conversion of an A350 for the German Air Force to be their Luftwaffe One, if you will, to
Hmm.
carry whoever the
Hmm.
prime minister is around. It won't be Merkel, I don't think, anymore by the time it's ready. It's a couple years away,
Okay.
um, but they do similar sorts of conversions. They do a lot of VIP aircraft conversions. So I've
Hmm.
seen renderings of like the Saudi or Qatari Emir 747s with the crazy interiors.
Hmm.
Lufthansa Technik does a lot of that work.
Oh, okay.
So same
And
idea, and they can manufacture it all. Actually, it's an interesting one. They have a humidor in their facility in Hamburg on the airport side, not the Finkenwerder side with the factory. So you got to visit both sides. There's a lot of avgeekery in Hamburg, but there's a humidor, but it's not for cigars. It's for hardwood laminates.
oh,
And
huh,
when you think about like the fancy wood lining and paneling in
yeah.
airplanes, uh, when a customer comes in and gets it done, they go out and buy enough to do the project, and then they buy extra, and they keep it, and it's part of the service, and you pay for it and whatnot. But they keep the extra, so if you damage it, they have matching hardwood that they can reinstall for you.
Huh. Oh.
And so but it's literally like a room probably the size of my house. I mean, it's a giant space um, in their factory where there's like drawers and drawers and drawers. Like I don't know if you remember like going to museums. They have like the old map drawers, the super wide, super deep, but like only this
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. They have like a couple racks of those that you can walk around and pull out like sheets of this thin veneer wood that gets used, and it's all labeled and marked and who's and whatnot. But they have it for all these different customers. It's pretty
Oh,
cool.
that's fantastic. And that leads into my choice question about the future of the private jet industry. How is it being impacted, or is it more of an inelastic good?
There's a lot of people saying that the surf air concept or any of that sort of type of the JSX, which is less dense seating, 30 seats in a 50-seater ERJ. A lot of people suggesting that's going to be the way of the future. People are going to want that additional space and they're going to be willing to pay for it. I'm less convinced. Part of that depends on just how long we really are suffering from a pandemic and, whether it's waiting for a vaccine, waiting for better treatment, waiting for better testing. I don't know what the it there is, but I, and maybe this is irrational optimism on my part, but I don't see this being a problem much more than a year or so out. And a full year from now, I mean, if we're in the same position we are now, a full year from now, a lot of bankrupt airlines, a lot of problems, a lot of depression/recession challenges economically globally. It's going to be a mess, but
Hmm.
I still don't think that drives a significant increase in private jet travel. I will say the statistics I've seen and how that all comes together in terms of what's operating, they bounced back faster.
Hmm.
Um, but those are the people that already had the means for the most part. And there will be a bump in charter services initially. There are some people that really need to get out and get places, and as borders open up, can't afford to wait for that one flight a week kind of
Hmm.
situation, which is a lot of what we're seeing in the schedules right now. Um, and there will be a bump initially, but I don't see long term that market growing enough. I just people will buy first class more than coach where they can and things like that. It's really expensive, and so I don't think this isn't enough of a tipping point to get to where people are suddenly going to be able to afford that. And those that who could afford it, a few more will maybe switch towards private and fractional jet service where they can sort of rent hours
Hmm.
rather than buying their own plane. But I don't see this as a huge shift there. Certainly not long term.
Yeah, and Tim is asking, as an av geek, your favorite narrow body aircraft to fly on, and follow up wide body, and favorite seat on a specific airline or aircraft.
Uh, Narrow body, I will say, in the soon to no longer really be flying 757-200, because it's just a sports car of an airplane. It's way over engined for 95% of the flights it does. And I still remember Continental, more than a decade ago, they called the Continental Dues. Actually, that picture of me in the overhead bin is from one of those. And earlier in the day when that picture was taken, I believe, they took a bunch of us up in 757 to sort of do a flight sim tour around Texas. It was actually supposed to be a different plane with a different thing that they were showing off, but the hardware was delayed. So yada yada yada. We got on board, but it was no fuel because we were only going to be up for like an hour. No baggage, so the plane was super light. And we did a low pass across Houston from Hobby, or from Intercontinental down towards Hobby, and so we flew across town at like 3,000 feet and started like we were descending into Hobby, and then they basically filed the plans to go there and then called a missed approach and took off again. And when they took off again, by this point we were all up in the aisles walking around, having a grand old time. And they hit the gas and put the throttles, and the plane like shot up. People fell down. It was like sliding through the aisles. It was, in retrospect, I was pretty drunk, so it was great. But in retrospect, it was probably also a little dangerous. So I love that. Newer, but they're getting retired. Delta's putting theirs out to pasture. United probably isn't far behind. Icelandair is going to be maybe the last one still flying them, but they're not long for this world. New planes coming along. I love the A220. Big windows, really comfortable ride, wide seats, very nicely done everywhere I've seen it. I've been on a few of them now from a few different airlines. Wide body A380, which alas is not long for this world at all. If you can get an upstairs seat on that plane, especially in the few economy class cabins that are upstairs there, it's just a great way to fly economy class, which I spend a lot of time doing. So, best seat on any sort of aircraft. I mean, give me a first class suite somewhere. I'm sure I wouldn't complain. I think I like the Singapore seat better than the Emirates seat because Emirates was more bling and Singapore was more refined. If I had to pick one of the first class sort of bed situations, I like better. I do like the new Polaris seat pretty well. A couple times I've been on that on the 777s. I haven't been on the smaller planes, so I'm not sure how it maps over, but that's been a nice ride.
You're a bit of a contrarian on direct aisle access.
Yes, because I don't care. I can climb over the people the once or twice I need to do it. I'm a window seat guy, so you'd think I'd care a lot. It turns out that you get worse window seats with direct aisle access. You don't get to see out the window as much as well. And I care more about that. I think the one exception to that is probably the Korean weird pseudo stagger direct aisle access thing, which is fine. It's a weird boxy seat, but it worked pretty nicely. It's a good business class seat. They sold it as first class with a slightly larger monitor, and it was not a good first class seat. So that's an interesting.
Yeah, Korean's one where the first time I saw their first class, I was walking from the back of the plane to the front. Yeah. I wondered, something seemed a little different, but I couldn't pin it down, and then realized it was like a bigger monitor or something.
It's literally it's the exact same seat as the business class, that boxy seat with a 23-inch monitor instead of 17 or something like that.
On that theme, so that'll tip my hand of the answer, but best economy class airline meal flying.
Best economy class airline meal that I've had recently is probably Qatar Airways. Turkish also does some really good food, although I don't fly them anymore.
Yeah, I love the Turkish meals. I was thinking for the one dish, the go-to, the Korean air bibimbap.
I've had that on business class with them a couple times recently. Too small a portion.
It is small, yeah. So I specifically didn't say business class because the business class one is not that special.
Yeah.
Nor is any of their business class.
Do they do a bibimbap in economy? I don't remember.
Oh yeah.
I haven't flown them in economy in a while, but
it's very consistent that you'll have that.
Yeah.
For the dinner and then the kanji for the breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. This may be one of the weirdest, awkward things. I don't think I've ever flown Korean in economy class. I think I've only flown them in business class.
I like the guava juice. They frequently come by with the drink tray, and that's
I'll take the mint lemonade from JetBlue, and the Middle Eastern carriers often do something similar.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Spike it with vodka if you can, but that depends on if you're on a JetBlue or Middle Eastern carrier, I suppose. But
The
I'm a
first
big
time my
fan.
wife flew the JetBlue Mint. What's that signature cocktail?
Yeah, it's mint lemonade
Which, well, the
with
alcoholic
vodka.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so she said, "Can I have it without vodka and without the sugar syrup?" And they said, "What, like seltzer and mint leaf?" And she said, "Yes, that's the one."
so it actually comes pre-mixed with the sugar syrup, so I don't think they can do that. But the vodka's added on board, so you can get it non-alcoholic. But getting it without the sugary bit, it might be a little harder.
So I've not I did fly Mint once. She's flown it a few times, and
Yeah,
immediately after it, our normal one is Delta, and she said, "I don't want to fly Delta again in the
I
U.S." How is
the,
Mint that good? The food, the experience, it
I
blows
don't
my
know
mind.
how they do it, but
Yeah.
they really knocked it out of the park. I was on the first Mint flight, God, 4 or 5 years ago now. Coming up on it was Father's Day weekend, either 2015 or 2016. So I was on that first flight, and it was amazing from day one. I still keep in touch with the flight attendants who
Mm.
worked that flight. It's like it's a bizarre, almost cultish sort of operation, and they for the front cabin they have a separate set of flight attendants. You can't just fall into it. You have to sort of get nominated to work there and then do extra training. They take it very, very seriously. And who knows if that'll change with the union rules as that flight attendant group becomes unionized. But um, it's partly that. It's partly the product. The product is just really good. They spend the extra, couple bucks per passenger flight to really deliver that product. And again, this is what it used to be. Who knows what it will be in the future. Although we're expecting a new seat coming later this year, early next year, probably early next year with the new A321 LRs that are supposed to go to Europe. So
I guess we'll leave it at supposed to go, but yeah, certainly my wife's feedback is that you can choose up to 3 of the smaller
yep,
plated entrees and mix and match. That's a
yeah, it's
great a
I
great
love it.
thing. It seems so simple, but so along those lines, Ezra in Australia, a young flyer, he's asking, "What's the most underrated airline?"
Ooh, underrated airlines. Trying to think. I actually would say it comes off a little probably EasyJet. Very utilitarian, very basic, but for when I fly EasyJet or Ryanair, I am generally willing to splurge, and I do the same thing on Spirit, and I would throw them in the same group. Splurge and buy the exit row, or in the case of Spirit, often the big front seat is at a very reasonable price point relative to just booking any seat at all. Um, for what usually comes out to be at or below the price point of the others, it's very simple, very basic, but nonstop where everything else would take a connection. Right price, right times often. I really, really enjoy taking the low cost carriers and converting it into something, not the true bare bones product, but something just a half step up is really enough for me. And I'd consider those sort of unsung in a lot of ways.
I thought of 3 answers if I was being asked. Guess
Oh,
which
yeah?
ones? Guess which ones I would add. I would say
I have no idea.
Ethiopian
Okay.
is
Yes.
really underrated. Except what is it? The A350 where the call button is in the armrest elbow position, so it's a cacophony. I don't know if they've ever fixed that, but
Like
I've
United
flown
screwed
them.
up on their 777s at one point.
I've flown them dozens of times, and like
Yeah.
never a late flight, and incredible the challenges they operate in. No airport power, outage, and the whole capital city of Chad, and they still get the flight out. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
incredible stuff. Fiji Airways, I think, is totally underappreciated, and maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe not as reliable schedule wise, but I've also had incredible
Yeah.
experiences.
And all new
And
planes
then,
now.
and then what? Sorry.
All new planes
Oh
now
yeah,
in
yeah,
Fiji. Yeah. Super
yeah.
super modern fleet. Similar. I mean, same idea with Ethiopian. They've went super
Mhm.
modern, and it's really a nicer operation.
And then I'd say every mainland Chinese airline.
We might differ in opinion there. Uh,
I keep wanting to have those experiences, and I lived there for almost a decade, and I go there multiple, and I don't have these experiences of pilots smoking and cock and everything that is claimed on Flyer Talk. But the flight delays are a huge problem, but that's a government regulation.
And I'll admit that my last domestic flight in China was, the experience was my fault. I went out of my way to fly out of Chengdu on Chengdu Airlines on the ARJ-21, which is their knockoff of the MD-80 converted down to a regional jet with only 70 seats.
That plane is like your white whale, right? You've tried to.
No, I got it. I actually got it when I went.
Okay.
I got it. But it's a Franken plane. It's like a mishmash of parts. Nothing really belongs. It doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right. But honestly, we were on time. It was fine. But the experience of in the airport in China is just, I don't know. I don't think I'm ready for it yet. I think I got to grow up and mature into that sort of experience. It's a lot even before you get on the plane.
I almost never pay to eat at an airport restaurant, but the new terminal at Pudong, I didn't go to Beijing Daxing when it opened. The new terminal at Pudong has incredible lamb kebabs from one of my favorite Uyghur food restaurants. And it's a chain restaurant, but it's out there. They have really some actual authentic Shanghai spots.
Nice.
The scallion noodles I love. And I have no idea what the situation will be like that when it gets back.
I got to say, I'm actually a big fan of spending money in an airport to have a real meal as opposed to trying to make a lunch out of the lounge food. For the 10 or 15 bucks it's going to cost me, I just end up so much happier than with like something that's food that I really wanted as opposed to, I know, a cup of cheese soup. And I mean, the food had, coming into this, the food had gotten better in lounges, so who knows where we'll be. But it was getting better, but it just still wasn't the same. Even like, I used to be an executive platinum and fly out of JFK, and I'd have flagship lounge access. Not flagship dining, but flagship lounge for a night flight. You get the buffet meal and this and that. And I'd go downstairs and have a chicken parm at the steakhouse instead. I liked it better. I'd have 2 drinks upstairs, go downstairs, have dinner and a drink, and then go back upstairs and have 2 more drinks before I get on the plane. So I guess I'm not going to pay for all the booze, but it was just better food. And there's limited exceptions in certain lounges where it's true cook to order, real variety sort of menu stuff. The Cathay First lounges in Hong Kong were like that. The ANA noodle bars to an extent in Tokyo were like that. But for the most part, where it's available, I find myself spending $20 in an airport terminal to eat.
Are you at a diner of, what was that, Classified at Newark? What's the future of these premium lounge and dining experiences at airports?
Yeah, Classified might still be an option that people like because it's such limited seating, and so you're guaranteed some space. Depends on how quickly airports fill back up. I don't anticipate that happening too much too quickly. The other day someone asked, there was not an earnings call, but like an investor conference with American Airlines, and someone asked if the flagship lounges were going to open before the Admirals Clubs. And the response was, flagship lounges are for premium demand passengers. If they show back up, we'll open the lounge, but we're going to have to see who actually comes, who gets back in the sky first. Whichever passengers show up is what we're going to open. So they don't really know, is the short answer. And I think that was a way of saying we have no idea when the flagship lounges are going to ever reopen. But until there's premium demand, until people are buying, and part of that is there's got to be the ability for the flights to operate. Right now, there's so many borders closed that there's no way to operate long haul flights. So who knows? June, there's going to be more long haul flights across the board out of the United States. July and August, their airlines are vaguely optimistic, but we won't really know until probably 3-4 weeks from now what the July-August schedules look like.
Richard's asking about the teeth of the DOT and their ability to enforce their rulings. I guess they choose to, right? Recently on airline refunds, but generally how much an airline fears DOT rulings.
Very little, unfortunately. And the other part of that's, terribly unfortunate is that if the DOT says no United Airlines or no American Airlines, you really had to give refunds, you were bad, smack you on the wrist, here's a fine, even. The fine just goes to the DOT. The passenger never necessarily gets made whole. So that's part of the problem with the way the DOT is structured. Now, I can't imagine trying to change it such that the DOT was adjudicating, sort of court cases for individual passengers to decide what the compensation is supposed to be. That would be a disaster. Far worse than what we deal with now. But it's not really a situation where the airlines the fines when they happen can be significant, and certainly no one wants to lose a few $1,000,000 here or there, especially not now. But the fines are typically pretty low, so there's not a lot of teeth in that operation. But I will say when the DOT came out a month or so ago now and was like, no guys, you actually have to give refunds. A few of the airlines sort of actually started to give refunds. It still wasn't perfect, but some airlines did change their policy reasonably quickly. They're still trying to force vouchers, and I think if they had just made the vouchers more valuable, 10 or 20% bonus on voucher over taking the cash refund, people would have taken it, and the airline would have saved some of the PR headache, and the airline would have looked good doing it, and people would have spent more money going out in the end because they would have spent the voucher plus whatever else it took to buy the ticket. But here we are.
What makes a good Secretary of Transportation is we have one currently who is a repeat from prior administrations, and I would guess as not a close observer, seems to be a canny political operator by staying out of the headlines. And is that what would be a
not being married to a senator? No, is it too much? I mean, I would like to pretend that there's actually some independence in how these things run. I know that's naive of me and whatever, but what makes a good Secretary of Transportation? Someone who actually understands demand beyond just any single mode of transit. And this sort of goes back to, we were talking earlier about my love of all things transportation. The U.S. is terrible at planning a coherent multimodal transportation strategy. And it has to include trains, it has to include highways, it has to include cars, it has to include planes, it has to include a lot of things. And what we have are vaguely independent operations that often defer to states rather than a coherent national plan. And I understand some of the reasoning behind that, sort of, what is it, the Ninth Amendment, that right there, everything else is reserved to the states. And like there's some reasons for those things, but also someone who can put together a better overarching coherent plan. And I feel like we haven't had that for a long time now, unfortunately. And that's not a partisan situation. That's just a problem with the way that no one has tried to put together, at least that I've seen, a good, strong plan to boost intercity rail where it should and invest properly in some of the infrastructure things that really need it, as opposed to funneling money off to the side to friendly contractors.
Along those lines, Joe mentioned you're a train geek as well as an av geek. So some of your top train experiences anywhere.
Yeah.
Could be Amtrak.
No, it wasn't. I did actually the Amtrak overnight train from Florida up to DC. It's not good. Don't do it. The car train. I would say overnight train on the high-speed rail in China. Always a really interesting experience. 6 hours from Beijing to Shanghai during the day. They slow the trains down and it takes about 10 hours at night. Really interesting ride. You're in a little pod of 4 people for the normal sleeper. They put 4 pairs of slippers in the room, color coded. So, you get your bunk and you pick which color slippers you want. There's some neat things about that experience. I just really have enjoyed it the twice I've done it. The other end of the spectrum, super slow rides, recently did Vietnam from, one of the cities in the middle of the country up to Hue, which I forget, whatever the city is with the airport, Da Nang to Hue maybe, is like a 30-mile car ride or 40-mile car ride, and it takes 3 hours on the train because the train has to go like 10 miles an hour on these tight turns hanging over a cliffside with just stellar views. It's really unbelievable. There's a similar train ride that you actually turned me on to in Sri Lanka, up in Tea Country, that my wife and I did far too long ago for me to think about remembering now, but thank you for that. And I just had another one that I was remembering while I was saying that, and I've now blanked on what it was. There was another super interesting one. The Darjeeling Toy Railroad.
Yeah.
Which I haven't fully published that story yet. It's like 90% written, and then I'm like, no one wants to read about travel stories anymore. I'm going to save it, I guess, but I got to start publishing again. We went, and it was 2 hours delayed leaving the station. And when they say toy train, it's like I think my shoulder blades touched both rails when I laid down in the track. It's this tiny narrow rail because it zigzags and makes super tight turns going up the steep hills into the Himalayan foothills. You start at sea level and finish at like 7,000 feet, 100 kilometers later. So it's a super steep run. And there's a couple switchbacks and this and that, but the train is tiny. It can hold, like, it looks like I could push it off the rails if I wanted to, which in the day we took it actually happened. Our train derailed.
No. Oh, geez.
And all of a sudden we were like bouncing up the side of the mountain. And we got out and we're like, oh, well, this isn't going to work. And we ended up waiting an hour or two and trying to figure out what was going on. And then flagged down a van driving up the hill and gave someone probably 2 months' salary to drive us the rest of the way. So that was an interesting experience in many ways.
I've got some Nathmol's tea that I've been occasionally using for my visit to Darjeeling. So maybe I'll enjoy one tonight then after we've talked. You put me in the mood for that.
There you go.
The quick answer on Jorge's asking about frequent flyer miles in general at risk going forward. So my sense is U.S. programs, better shape, international case by case.
Yeah, bigger airlines probably safer. Smaller airlines less so. Look for countries that have already shown a willingness to back the airline and fund it for likelihood of staying in business. Also remember that the loyalty programs usually have value even without the outsized value relative to the airline. I shouldn't say without the airline. Every now and then one survives if the airline disappears, but that is rather rare. So depends on if someone buys them out or if the airline truly just liquidates and sort of evaporates. So, a Virgin Australia program, that airline's not disappearing. Someone else is going to come in and buy out the assets and keep it running. That program will be fine. Virgin Atlantic, less clear what would happen if they can't get their funding sorted. Norwegian, bad idea.
You wouldn't necessarily have a lot of value banked in that program.
That program had no value to begin with anyways. So I think I have $1.36 left in my balance because I just, discount I can get on my next ticket. Yay.
I think I had one of those. I'm forgetting which airline. I had net about that value of between $1 and $2, and here I was researching how to use it. So wait a minute, this is just let the thing expire. But,
I'll send you $2 stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'd rather have our Belgian beers at your West Village spot at some point. But,
there you go.
You now live in a little north of that, and I'm not sure the reference, but Anshul, formerly Bling Singh, he said he used to be wearing a lot of bling. He says a new family moved in with you, so I don't know.
Oh, yeah, we had some a robin laid eggs. And in a nest right next to my grill, so I have to be very careful about the chicken I cook for the next few months so as to not offend them. It's very awkward.
And I wanted to pivot a bit to your career. As a lot of the advice you hear is follow your passion, and then sensible people say following your passion is a good way to be bankrupt, and then follow where you can get paid, and somehow you've threaded the needle. So you've got IT work that you've done for many years. You build travel tools. You do reporting. You have multiple websites. A lot of things you're doing, and you're making it work.
Yeah, barely. But it is working. Moving out of New York City was part of making it work. So, there is a lot of, I do believe in follow your passion, but do it in a rational way. And so, my wife, I'm going to use her as an example first, and I'll talk about me a little bit. She was a Accenture consultant out of school for a couple of years, went into individual businesses, worked with startups, did a lot of things, but always wanted to be a writer of fiction. And we built up a little bit of a nest egg and made sure we had the money and the wherewithal to support it. But then she went back and got her MFA. And even while still working a less stressful job, sort of doing public service kind of work or nonprofit work, went out and spent a lot of time also working the second job of writing this book, and then sold the books, and they've been successful and wonderful, and living off of the advance from that for a little bit of time and not doing the other work. And now that the advance money is running out, there's still some residual eventually, but excuse me, going back and looking at some of the other things again. For me, I talk about the travel stuff all the time. I write about the travel stuff. You'll almost never hear me talk about the IT stuff, other than that background helps me with the knowledge I need to develop the tools, which on the websites that you mentioned. but I probably, especially right now because I'm not traveling at all, I'm doing a lot of IT work. I'm again trying to top off the coffers to make sure that when the time comes and I can travel again and I want to travel again and spend more of my focus and energy there, I have that available. And it is a balancing act in a lot of ways. There are days where, and there's sometimes where like the site goes dark for a week and I don't publish anything new, and you might not know why, and it's because I was neck deep in an IT project and like things went wrong and I didn't have time even to whip up a quick like stupid story of anything. So I still haven't figured out the balance perfectly. And you talk about don't go bankrupt. I've been doing this full time now. I think 11 years.
Mm.
Maybe this was my 12th. This is either my starting my 12th or I can't remember if it's 2008 or 2009 I started, but whatever. I have come close to bankrupting the company a couple times, down to sort of the last month or two of what I could justify for payroll and expenses. And either IT or travel related something came through and the money happened. But, I was begrudgingly ready to go out and look for a real job again. And so you have to be realistic about it and understand that it might not be perfect. It might not last, but build up a little bit of a cushion and then hop on board and ride the ride. Like, go have that fun because punching a clock every day sucks. So does being in India for 2 months, hopping locations every day. And I decided I didn't like that either. And so, find the right balance for you. But, find a way that you can make it work. But I say be a little more practical than just like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to drop everything and go do it. Figure out how it's going to work. Figure out, in my case, before I quit my real job, I went on an interview for the first time in 10 years and made sure I still know how to talk to people and like get a new job, just in case it didn't work out. So
great idea.
Now I have a lot more trouble with that, but I've been sticking around with the consulting thing just enough that I have to do sort of new project interview, get hired things, but it's a little different. I haven't updated my resume in a long time, which is awkward, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I felt like in terms of if we just took the aviation reporter piece, which you can imagine a lot dreaming of, and it seems like in the past year, for all the criticisms you can make of the points guy, it did seem to be like the aviation reporter cut by mainstream publication pension program to hire a lot of talented people that I enjoy their writings. I've been thankful for that, but certainly dwindling opportunities and people that, to my eyes, were trying to do the exact same thing they were doing 5 or 10 years ago. That didn't seem like it was going to be working.
No, and unfortunately, the online revenue model streams are changing dramatically. I'd argue that there's basically 4 models. It's affiliate links, display advertising, subscriptions, and donations. And the display advertising and affiliate models the display advertising models absolute disaster right now. Revenue's just down dramatically because no one has any marketing budget right now, and they're not advertising against anything pandemic related. So
that's what I've heard from people. Traffic is up in many cases.
Yeah, my traffic doubled last month, and my revenue went down 30%. So, just that. So display advertising is bad. Affiliate revenue is similarly bad in a lot of ways. A lot of the sort of smaller programs, travel-related programs, cut their affiliate links. A lot of the credit card companies cut their affiliate links. So there's no payouts. Some of the payouts are now delayed more. There's a whole lot of bad going on in that model. For the subscription and donation type situation, you gotta have a big enough base and readership of people who like what you're doing. And it's, because so much is just free out there, whether it's good or not, you run into some interesting problems. A lot of, it used to be that social media, like Facebook, would drive traffic to sites. And so if you would invest in social media advertising on Facebook, you could drive traffic to your site and then you could pick up subscribers there. Now a lot of it's shifted towards SEO and sort of Google stuff. And you run into a challenge of, if you want subscription content, you can't display the full content because Google will just index it and share it. But if you don't display the full content, Google doesn't know what it is, so it can't redirect people back to you if they're searching for things that you might be able to share. And also, no one's going to subscribe to get one article. We never figured out that sort of fractional payment situation, despite, many different people coming up with claims that they had the model to make that work. So you
The
kind of
course
need to
of
find
the
for
decision
people.
every time. I feel like it just puts such mental stress on the reader to,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's hard. So there's no good solution out there. You got, ironically, it's got to be a passion. It's got to be something that you truly love and are willing to work ridiculously hard with limited returns against to develop. But it can work. And here I am 11 years in, but not solely doing that by any stretch.
Mentioning subscriptions, Mike was asking, are there ones you actually pay for, like Expert Flyer, OAG? I'm not familiar with.
OAG is something airport guide or airline guide. It's the original airline guide. Something they are the timetable people.
Okay.
So that's where you get. I wish I could afford an OAG subscription for the real access to their timetables. It's insanely useful, like data mining. I would get lost in there for months if I had it. Do I subscribe to any of those services? There's one or two online publishers. I do subscribe to the Air Current, which is John Ostrower. It's a little pricey, but he does some really interesting deep dive stuff. It's topical, but not breaking news most of the time, but relevant to sort of what's going on in the industry. I don't have an Expert Flyer subscription. It turns out that a long time ago I had a KVS subscription, but then I found out that all the data they were scraping was free, and actually built my own version of the tool at one point, and then just had the underlying sources. So. For Expert Flyer, most of what they publish hasn't been relevant to my needs. I certainly see it as relevant depending on what you're looking for and where you're at, but it just hasn't personally been useful to me. So I don't have a lot of those subscriptions. So take that for what it's worth. But I'm also willing to usually to put in stupid amounts of extra hours of my own life to find things that I probably could have just paid someone a couple bucks for.
Which leads us to your tools, which
yeah.
if I could say gently, you don't market as aggressively as one could with such capabilities.
And I don't maintain them as aggressively as one could because like 2 years ago I lost access to the source codes. They haven't been updated in a long time. And that's embarrassing, and I just haven't had the energy to recreate them because I'd have to learn a whole new infrastructure of web development, and it was a hobby more than a business model. Unfortunately, Hotel Hustle made money for a little while, but right now with no hotel revenue coming in on commissions, that's done, and the rest of them is just because I thought they were fun. I do love the tools, though. I actually still load data in for the aircraft tail number lookup stuff. I have a whole other set of data that eventually I want to add into it if I can bother to get off my ass and fix it and update the web page. But yeah, I should spend more time developing those and bringing some of them to life. Part of that also is I get ideas for what to do when someone's like, hey, I can't figure out how to do X, Y, Z. I'm like, I look at someone, I'm like, I know how to do that. The whole reason Hotel Hustle started is because Scott Marowitz, who now works at the Points Guy, running their news organization, posted on Twitter one day, does anyone know a good way to get award alerts if a Hyatt hotel room opens up for an award night? And I had been thinking about it for a while, and I was like, I actually know how to do that. I had started doing it for another hotel program already. And I was like, I wrote back to him, I'm like, give me a couple hours, I'm getting on a plane. And by the time I landed, I had the infrastructure working. So, and then one by one, I just added the additional programs and made it a full, it started with like, you could individually search different hotel programs. And then one day I was like, what, this is stupid. I'll just search them all in parallel. And I did. So it wasn't great. It wasn't efficient at all, but it worked. So it's the story of my programming life. Not good, but it works.
I know. I'm realizing you never hit me up to renew on your first class tools things. You're not even marketing to me. How about the UNESCO tools? Do you keep those up to date?
I keep those up to date in terms of adding the locations. It's a little bit of a lag because I have to wait till when UNESCO publishes them. I need them to publish like the coordinates and the text and everything also. But I do keep those up to date. So the data of the listing of all of them remains. I believe I'm pretty sure I did the 2019 ads last year. The 2020 ads should come out in July, I think. So we'll get there soon.
All right, fantastic. Jason Sheen is asking, would you climb back in the overhead bins now? And he misses you from the boarding area blogger forums where you were very active in expressing your opinions. It was entertaining.
Yeah, well, the good news is Karen's no longer there, so I don't have anyone to yell at. That was awkward. would I get back in an overhead bin? Yes, with a caveat. The overhead bin that I got in was on an old Continental 737, and it was sort of one of the double length bins.
Okay.
The new space bins that sort of flip up that are
Uh-huh.
only 4 or 5 bags wide. The one I was in was like 8 bags wide.
Mm.
And you can't see how far my hands are going. Once caught a fish this big. The reason for that is the double wide bins are rated for the heavier weight, and I am of a certain weight that if you look at what's written on this side of the bin, I will get in a lot of trouble when I climb in and it falls out of the airplane ceiling. So that's the only reason, though.
And thinking of that, so I forget, what are you, 6'3", 6'5", something like that?
5'11", 5'11", 195 to 200.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Crash
thinking,
test dummy.
so you're, oh, that's right. So you're just the right height that most of the lie flat, back to the direct aisle type things, those, you would fit. But I've always wondered on that design. I mean, there's trade-offs, but a lot of the people who are paying for those seats are 6 feet or over, it seems, on a number of airlines.
Yeah.
And yet they don't fit the people who are paying them. And I'm wondering, would it lose that many seats to make it work for somebody who's like 6'2" compared to 6 foot, or how does that work?
You probably lose a row, and so if you have to take 4 or 6 seats out, that's a lot of revenue, and you either have to raise prices somewhere else to make up for that. So the short answer is, can they make it work? Sometimes, KLM, because they fly Dutch people who are very tall, they fly the same seat as the old United seat, right? The Diamond, or the old Continental seat, I should say, which became United, but whatever. They configured it to be a couple inches taller because that's where their passengers truly needed that. I would argue that for a lot of people buying the premium seats, they probably need the width more than the height, unfortunately. And so similar problem, you're still going to lose a few if you try to go too much wider. But how they pull that together, it's a delicate balancing act of optimizing every square inch of footprint on the airplane. And, there's how many carts can you fit in the galley, and what does that mean for catering? And if you take out a half of a galley and replace it with a bar, or extending the seats, 8 extra inches or 16 inches, which is 3 inches on each of the 6 rows, right? 18 inches, right, of the 6 rows in that front section. That's 18 inches. So you lose half a galley in the middle of the, at the second boarding door there of a twin aisle airplane. And what does that do for catering? And does that mean now you can't have a separate plate for your appetizer? And the sort of fall-on effects of all those things. The folks that are thinking about this, some of them are certainly idiots, because there's idiots in every job everywhere, but a lot of them are also very smart. And some of the folks I've talked to about this, it's the major airlines really do take those things into consideration. So it's not just that they want to be mean. There's a reason for it. Do they need to necessarily make that extra $1 million so that they can pay out stock buybacks, and then when the economy tanks, get government bailouts? Probably not a great example, but here we are.
And I've occasionally done some blog posts on how low in the corporate hierarchy frequent flyer program managers sit, because people, myself included, I tend to think of okay, I take Delta, as I said, it's my main airline. I feel like half of the airline is the flying and half of it's the frequent flyer program.
Yes.
And yet, to me, but then the way the airlines organize it, the frequent flyer program manager is like a mid to almost junior level manager in the marketing organization, way down. And
I think that's shifted a little bit, and that loyalty is certainly part of there's someone who is very senior that's part of the loyalty program also, because the value of the loyalty programs is very real, and the airlines know that. So you do have a senior, maybe not a senior vice president, but a vice president level person now, definitely on top of loyalty. Now, in some airlines, it's loyalty and whatever else it is.
And like Delta, it's and then they have some managing directors or other different confusing titles. Yeah.
So there is that problem, but obviously the people running the program day to day are going to be lower, because they always are at running anything day to day. But I think that the loyalty programs do get good representation significantly high up in the organization, but they also they do suffer from not being part of the core operation. And as much as they are key to the revenue, win, and profit of the airlines, they are not part of the core operation. So there is a disconnect there.
And as part of it, that airline employees have their own travel benefits and their own system that they spend all their time gaming and figuring out instead of having to use the frequent flyer program?
I'm sure that's a little bit of it, but the number of airline employees I know who are also frequent flyer point junkies is surprisingly large. Mistake fares and oh, hey, look, I can status match my Wyndham to a something to end up with top tier status at a casino in Las Vegas or in Atlantic City that then can be transferred to Las Vegas. Like there's some weird stuff out there, and people that have found these sort of loopholes and whatever. And that just because you work for an airline doesn't mean you're not into the scheming and gaming by any stretch. So
let's have we'll close with a few travel questions. So you guys have
Sure.
an annual beer trip somewhere in Europe.
Yep.
So your top beer destination that maybe people haven't thought of as a beer destination.
Vilnius we had great beer. Salzburg, people do think of as beer, but it still is great beer.
All right. And Faroe Islands versus Iceland.
Faroe Islands. Iceland is also amazing, but the Faroe Islands just aren't as built up yet. It is definitely a more rustic travel experience, even than getting to the far side of the ring road in Iceland. Just really untouched nature. It's amazing.
And how to make Faroe Islands work on a somewhat reasonable budget?
Go to Iceland. You can do it. We spent a couple nights there. We did an Airbnb and stayed in someone's guest room. Right in one of the towns, which was lovely. She picked us up at the bus station that we took in from the airport and brought us back when we had to leave. The rest of the time we just walked or took the buses and ferries. One neat thing about the Faroe Islands is they have a helicopter service locally that connects some of the far-flung islands that don't necessarily have roads connecting them. And it's subsidized by the Danish government. So a 30-minute helicopter tour of the islands is 20 or $30 one way. But it's an expensive place to be. Don't stay long. It's the same as Bhutan. There's not a really, really good way to do it cheap. You just don't stay as long.
Saba and Win Air.
Love it. I love Saba. It's the islands. It's Caribbean islands without a beach. So there's hiking and some mountain stuff, and there's great scuba diving, but no beach. So you don't get the people who are sort of umbrella drinks and drunk, rowdy, crazy, which Stephen called me, a grandpa the other day on our podcast because I got into woodworking and going to sleep early. He's right, but here we are. It's the type of beach or Caribbean island destination I love. Scuba diving and just palm fronds and swimming pool kind of scene. So Win Air is the way to fly there, and I actually really like the Win Air experience. There's nothing special about it, but it's a very small, locally run. 12-seater airplane kind of situation. It's a lot of fun. Good people.
Is that landing on Saba really as challenging for the pilots as advertised?
It is. It's the shortest commercial runway, or one of the shortest commercial runways, and you basically fly straight towards the mountain, and right before you hit it, turn left, and you land on a slope that's running away from you. When we were sitting there waiting to leave on the trip we made, the gate agents or the baggage agents were standing next to us, with the cart ready to go out and load. And someone landed, and one of them says, "I think that was Joey," or whatever, called out a name. And I looked at him like, "You guys actually can tell who's flying based on the landings?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course," because there's only so many pilots that do it. I would say that St. Bart's is actually a more technically challenging landing, just because the wind's swirling and the way the road drops right in. It's even scarier. But it's a little longer and it's got a better out at the end. So, and I've not done the what's it called the one in the middle of the Pacific, the middle of the Atlantic.
St. Helena. Yeah.
St. Helena. Yeah, I haven't done that landing yet, which again for the winds is very challenging.
Yeah, I'd say that's challenging. As a passenger, it's one you need to be made more aware of the challenge. Where in Saba or St. Bart's, you're out. You're seeing.
They sort of warn you. Yeah, you see it coming.
Yeah. Loving flying and living. You live how many hours from Boston, Logan?
I'm 90 minutes door to door to the Logan
Oh,
Airport. Yeah, and that's on transit. There's an hourly bus that I can leave my house and be there in under 2 hours.
okay. So I think that would be reasonable to me. What about living
Yeah.
somewhere in the U.S. where you would have to connect to a hub? Would you do it?
Would I? Yes. Do I want to? No. So there'd have to be a very good reason for it. When we were moving out of New York, one of the considerations was must be close to a at least reasonably major airport. And I would have considered connecting hubs, but having direct international service makes a huge difference.
Okay. And this massive trip you alluded to. So you had Bhutan, Nepal, India, Singapore,
Yep.
and you decided eventually a bit long and flew back. So
Yes.
lessons learned.
When you're not having fun, stop doing it. Right? I mean, this was a holiday. This was a vacation for my wife and I, and we looked at each other and got sick at one point. It wasn't good, and we looked at him like one day it was like, okay, well, we were probably 10 or 12 days from what was officially the end of the trip, and I looked at him like, we could just go home, right? He says, really? I said, give me a minute. And I opened up my laptop, and 15 minutes later, I had 3 different reward seat options home 2 days later. And I was like, you want to go in the morning or the evening? We're done. I had to unwind some of the other things. There was a little bit of cost to it. Most of it was on points, though, and I had enough status that the changes were free. But even if they weren't, they would have been cheap relative to whatever else was going on. And we didn't want to be there anymore. So paying $500 to go home, if that's what it was going to cost, it ended up costing us way less than that. But if it was going to cost us $500 to go home, then after 2 months on the road, pay the $500 and go home. You don't get a special merit badge for suffering through your travels, especially when it's supposed to be a holiday and a vacation and fun. We're going to go back to Udaipur. We're going to go back to Jaipur. And when we go, we'll actually be fresh and we'll enjoy them as opposed to hating the fact that we're still there.
I found in different trips I've taken to India, the best was when I based at a guy I used to work with and based at his house in Delhi when he was an expat,
Yeah.
and I could spend 3 days working and recharging, and then a long weekend going somewhere. And you and I both are fans of Amritsar. It's my favorite city in India that I've been to. Bhopal's another one I really like of incredible UNESCO sites and history, and not the overwhelming moment. So favorite trek in Nepal? You took a bunch.
We did one in Nepal and one in Darjeeling.
Okay.
We did what's called Poon Hill out of Nepal, and Darjeeling. I forget the name of it, but it was similar. It was there were aggressive hikes, but both of them were about a week long, 8 days I think, 7 days, something like that. Both were great. I would say Darjeeling as a town isn't as cool as it probably once was when it was a tiny little hill station and it feels overrun now, like everything else in India. Even Mussoorie, which is this tiny little hill town outside of Delhi, which is where the rich, the wealthy used to vacation and send their kids away to boarding school, and still do send their kids to boarding school, which is why we were there visiting friends. Felt a little crowded, and it's not, but it feels it a little bit. So, especially down, that's one where there's sort of an up and a down, and up in the hills is okay, but the bottom end is super crowded and chaotic, like so much of India these days. So. Both of those were great. I would say slight edge to the Nepal one. Irony, of course, being that the first thing you do when you do the Darjeeling hike is you drive out to the border station where you start and cross a land border into Nepal. There's a giant sign that says "Welcome to Nepal" as you start the hike. No stamps, no formalities, but you spend 90% of the hike in Nepal, even though it's an India hike.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, the Nepalese have all the hill stations and snack bars and everything else in hotels and hostels, and the Indians have border patrols.
And
take that for what it is.
The merits of starting beefs online on Twitter.
Oh, terrible idea, but I can't stop myself.
Okay. And Joseph May will
Sorry,
close.
Richard.
He said the best advice you ever gave him was find a cheap airfare to wherever, and you will find something interesting wherever you go.
Absolutely. Chase the fare, not the destination. You'll get to, unless there's no reason to say I can only go to place X. I mean, maybe there is. There may be a really, really good reason that you have to go to some place at some time, but the rest of the time in your life, especially if you're you just want to explore, chasing the fare, gosh, this is a cheap ticket to Quito. Why did I go to Quito? Because it was at the time $300 round trip and it lined up perfectly with our anniversary. Right? Like, pick a random place and go. Would I have eventually gone to Ecuador? Yeah, probably. But it forced my hand and we went. And then we found the cloud forests and we found this and we found that. It was just, it really does change the way you experience things.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for joining us tonight, Seth.
Thanks for having me.